welcome to In the Cordon, the place where every cricketer wants to be. I'm your host, Callum Dunk, and joining me on the show tonight is Louis Dade. Louis, thanks for joining me, mate.
No, it's a pleasure, Callum. It's almost 10 p.m. here in Adelaide, but I'm still awake enough to make sure that I put my bat back in my crease and I'm ready to get to another over with you.
Oh, this is going to be a fun episode, and we've both got a fair bit to say about what happened at Lord's last night. So tonight we're going to be talking about the first two test matches. So the first test match in Edgbaston where Australia won by 2 wickets and sort of came out of nowhere to win that game. And obviously the second test that concluded last night with Australia winning by 43 runs. We thought it was going to be Headingley 2.0, but Australia were able to hold their nerve and go up in the series 2-0. We just want to thank our sponsor of this episode in Cooper Cricket, the famous bat company from Josh Brown. So get in touch with Rod and the team at Cooper Cricket today to get all of your bat needs. And if you want to get some custom-made stumps for the summer, that is the place to go. So, Louis, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the dismissal of Jonny Bairstow. Now, a lot has been made of it, and ultimately I think the right decision was made. And I don't think too many people disagree that the right decision was made. It's more about the spirit of cricket aspect, which people just seem to want to harp on about. What are your thoughts on Bairstow's dismissal, and do you think he was just being a bit lazy?
Look, and it goes without saying that, you've prefaced that pretty well. I think the letter of the law is pretty clear, so I don't think there's much point time, discussing that. But first and foremost, I think it's worth to say that Carey cannot be held responsible, regardless of your stance on the spirit of cricket. He threw the ball well and truly before Bairstow had left his ground. So any of the argument around this being Alex Carey's responsibility, I think, is somewhat irrelevant. But my stance, and look, as an Australian, I think we all accept that we do put winning over sometimes sportsmanship from time to time. That is part of kind of the way that we like to play our sport. But I certainly think that this is on Bairstow and the English team to just accept at the end of the day. I don't think it was outside the bounds of the law. I think when your head coach has done 3 separate instances of things that are probably more in the breach of spirit of cricket, when you yourself as a team regularly engage this tactic as a wicket keeper, the only one I think that has an argument is Ben Stokes, who I think potentially may actually stand by his words if he might have withdrawn his appeal. But from my perspective, Jonny Bairstow's, even the cold looks he was giving Pat Cummins during the handshake, if he's got any problems, it's the fact that when Ben Foakes is healthy, I'm not sure that he keeps a spot on the side. He really needs to worry more about doing the right things on the field than making snarky comments and generally being critical of the Australians off the field, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it led to some stern words from Australia's most famous villain in Stuart Broad. So, Broad went up to Alex Carey and say, "Oh, you'll always be remembered for that." But he clearly doesn't remember his aspects from 2013 and not walking when he clearly nicked that ball off Ashton Agar. And that ended up winning England a test match. And you know what? Have a taste of your own medicine sort of thing. That's my comments to Stuart Broad. And I suppose it leads to the treatment from the Lord's crowd. And, you pay your money to go and say what you want over the fence. You can go and heckle, no problems with that. But I suppose the prestige nature of Lord's and the MCC, to see the Australian players just pop proper abuse as they walk into the long room was something that was pretty distasteful. And I believe that 3 members of the MCC have been suspended due to that. But, we like cricket when there's fire in the contest and there's genuine heat between the players. But, that kind of abuse is just stepping the line for me. And I know as Australians, we've done things that overstep the line, but I haven't seen an English crowd with such ferocity, other than probably in Edgbaston, for quite some time. What are your whole thoughts on the walk room? And it's just such an obscure thing to talk about, particularly when we are saying how prestigious Lord's is as a venue.
I think I saw a piece by I think Andrew McClashin, who's a journalist, ESPN Quick Info, does great stuff. Do check his work out. But his argument was that there was a different crowd in Lords yesterday, day 5, cheaper tickets. I also appreciate that sentiment. I draw a very different line between what the English crowd out in the general admission are doing and what the guys in the long room should be doing. So I think. And I think I speak for most Australians when I say I love the English sport culture, the chants. I think it's hilarious. I know that some of it probably crosses an ethical line here or there, but I think that's part of the game. I think it's great. No problems. Australians embrace, that crowd culture, whether it's the Hill, whether it's Bay 13 or whatever it is. And I think that part of it is fine. But the guys in the long room need to have a good, pardon the pun, long look at themselves in the mirror, because at the end of the day, in that room, you're given almost unheard of access to the players. You're basically within touching reach of them as they enter the playing field, both as individuals and as teams. And I think that's where I'd like to see not just suspensions. I think that if this happens in the same setting in Australia, I'm confident that everyone attached to that, all those 3 gentlemen would have been probably life banned, just realistically, with the way we now approach this in Australia. Let the masses do what they want. Let the guys on the £25 ticket who have cashed in, sitting in the stands, enjoy themselves. But those prestige members of the MCC, which is meant to be, the standard of ethics and appreciation of the finer parts of the game, almost worse than the spray that Kawaja got was the series of men that are probably 60 plus that thought it would be a good idea to just berate the guys and call them cheats on their way out. That was just pathetic. I loved Matt Renshaw just giving him the cheeky grin. I thought that was great. But I think those guys need to be held to a standard. But as far as the guys in the stands, let them go. Let them say that Australians are cheating. That's fine. I think that's all part of the game.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, mate. I thought it was pretty distasteful, as I said before, and hopefully we don't see anything like that. And as you touch on, the chanting, it's something that we love about English cricket. Like, we've got our club soccer football song, if you're from the UK, based on, don't take me home, please don't take me home. That's our club song. So, we love to get around that sort of stuff. But I wanted to talk to you, Lewis, about the captaincy of Pat Cummins. And I was watching on the couch last night, and it was hard not to get flashbacks of Headingley. We were lucky that when Broad came to the crease, there was 180 runs needed, rather than when Jack Leach arrived at the crease at Headingley, it was only 73 or something from memory. But Australia were able to hold their nerve this time, but they made a lot of fans nervous. And I was super critical watching on the couch with the old man about the tactics of Pat Cummins, just the constant short balls, the constant men out on the field. I'd rather them give away a boundary to, have 6 balls at Stuart Broad. And just because you've got 1 or 2 balls in the over doesn't mean you need to properly pepper the bloke with short stuff. And I love Australia getting stuck into Stuart Broad. It's part of, why we love the Ashes and all that. But I just thought it was really dumb tactics from Australia. At least Pat Cummins didn't burn a review this time in the dying moments of the game. But I just thought the tactics were extremely negative. It kind of reminded me of the first day at Edgbaston with so many men out. I understood what they were trying to do, and they were able to curb the scoring after lunch, which did lead to the downfall of Ben Stokes. But how did you see the tactics from the Australians? Because I thought they were pretty ordinary, despite getting the result.
Look, I very much firstly echo your thoughts on the nerves, and if it's any consolation to not only Ben Stokes and the look, as part of this, Ben Stokes was tremendous yesterday. He when he's on, he's going to be a player that 20 years from now, when the next generation of kids are coming through, it's going to be hard to describe how a guy that averaged a little bit less than 40 in Test cricket was so threatening on his day. But well batted to him. He certainly, there was not an Australian that was staying up watching that didn't think we were losing that game once they got within about 90 odd runs, and they still hadn't. Stokes was still in. Like I was in many text threads, one with yourself included, a variety of group chats. We all thought the game was done. He has well and truly scared the shit out of the Australian population, and I'm not sure it's not much of a consolation, but credit to him. But my stance on it was, and it's interesting, me and you probably share a slightly different view on this. So I was less frustrated by the field setting, which I was frustrated by, and more the way we approached the way we were bowling at Stokes. And for me, the tide turned when we did start mixing it up with more balls outside off stump, making sure we were avoiding that in-between length that Stokes could just get in and under, and switching between, outside off stump and a proper well-placed bouncer. Now, of course, this conversation becomes irrelevant if Steve Smith holds that catch. But for me, and if you look at the dismissal, the shot that Stokes played when he got dismissed, felt like he was trying to force it a little bit. I don't think he'd middled one in quite some time. It was almost like he was trying to overhit it. And to me, that was credit to the fact that we'd corrected our line and length a little bit. Now, objectively, right, you're right. The fields were not where they should have been. I think I could have lived with that if we didn't take so long to stop bowling, belly button high half trackers, because that was my biggest frustration. And look, credit to Josh Hazlewood. He did create the first chance. He created the second. But I just think that, and I think Cummins needs to take some responsibility. So Cam Green objectively got spanked yesterday, which is fine. We won the game. I don't think he executed great. I think a lot of this is on Cummins for the fact that, you're telling him to just come in and bang everything in. He's going to get hit when he's defending a 40-metre boundary and one of the best fourth innings batters that the game's ever seen. So for me, I was more annoyed with the bowling tactics and less with the fielding tactics, but I completely understand your sentiment about the field setting.
Yeah, it was just more, even when Australia was, had England 9 down, just the continuous tactics, just bowl at the stumps.
Awful. Yeah, that was awful.
It was just bowl at the stumps. I don't know why they didn't take the new ball. I know it was over in the 81st over, but why would you not take the new ball in that scenario? And sure, Stark bowled tongue, and then Australia got the win. But I just felt extremely frustrated on the couch because it just brought back the heartache of what happened at Headingley 4 years ago. And I so wish Australia had Ben Stokes.
He's very Australian in the way he plays the game, I think. I mean, he was born in New Zealand, no secret, obviously, but for me, I think that he'd be such an adored Australian cricketer. And funnily enough, we haven't had too many great all-rounders in the last 50, 60 years. And I think Australians would cherish a cricketer like Ben Stokes, given the opportunity to have him play in the baggy green.
Oh, no doubt about that. And just his thought process, his calmness at the crease, he thought it out really well, particularly before lunch. He played the Australians like a violin. It was just a masterclass, to be perfectly honest. And it was a shame that he got out when he did. I would have, part of me wanted him to get close, but not quite get there, and continue on. But it was just really good theatre, and it will make the Australians nervous going into the next few, test matches. But I feel like that knock will really ignite England. And I wouldn't be, even though Australia are 2-0 up at the moment, I wouldn't be surprised if England came out and won the next test at Headingley, because I feel like Stokes really got some momentum. The sort of captain's knock, jump on my back mentality. What do you make of the pitch? I thought the first 2 days it played really well, and it seemed like a good cricket wicket. And there was a bit in at day one, and both sides were going to win the toss and bowl. But as the game progressed, I thought the pitch it was just lifeless. I'd prefer, it to be a green seamer all the way through, or, generally Lords does break up on days 4 and 5, but we didn't see any of that. And obviously it doesn't help that Australia didn't have a frontline spinner in Nathan Lyon to be able to call on in that fourth innings. So what did you make of the deck, and what did you make of England's selection going with 4 quicks?
So the deck was acceptable, but barely, in my opinion. It wasn't so bad that I think, it's not one of those, it's not like that wicket the MCG a handful of years ago now, whatever. Not the kind of wicket that needs an ICC review by any stretch of the imagination, but it was an uninspiring pitch. I think that to a certain extent, and I mean, you talk about the rules of the game, but the pitch has to take some level of responsibility for the fact that both teams decided that resorting to short pitch bowling was probably the most effective way to take a wicket. Because if the only variability was the odd change in bounce or speed off the wicket, after the first couple of days, it really stopped seaming around. To be fair, first couple of days, like you said, I thought it was a great wicket. I think that guys were able to score runs. There were also a couple of unplayable deliveries, using the surface. It's a little hard to comment without Nathan Lyon playing, because I think he would have got it to spin, and I think that would have changed the perspective of it. But I also think that a lot of that goes down to Nathan Lyon and the credit he takes. I'm actually very fascinated on what sort of wicket we'll see for the third test now, because two relatively docile wickets in the scheme of things has led to England now going down 2-0. And I'm interested to see if they roll out a green steamer or what they do. As far as the selection goes, it's a hard one to comment on, right? Because Josh Tongue really endeared himself with the way he bowled. I thought he bowled really well. I think he's actually a guy that will bowl well in Australia, given the chance. So on paper, it's hard to knock that selection. But I do think that the balance of this side, if Moeen Ali's not going to come back in, is a little bit off. Although I will say that in English conditions, I think Joe Root is an acceptable, 7 to 10 overs a day of spin if you need it. But in a fourth innings situation, it puts you in a tough spot. Also, shout out to our former teammate Harry Marshall, who's on the Lord's groundkeeping team. If you go back next year, Harry, make sure that wicket has a little bit more life in it, please, mate.
Yes, shout out to Harry, good mate of the Southern Districts Cricket Club that we used to play for in Adelaide. So, Steve Smith, 32nd Test ton, 174 innings in Test cricket to reach that milestone. Just made for all-round conditions, and of the Fab Four, he is clearly the most highly regarded of the lot, because he's done it all. He's done it all around the world. How did you assess his knock? And are there any particular performances from Australia that you really admired during the second test?
A couple of things there. One, I was actually thinking about this when Steve Smith was reeling off his 100. I thought to myself, I actually spoke to my old man about it. I said, how many hundreds do we think have been scored by Steve Smith in England, and where does that put him in all-time Australian players? I believe he tied Steve Waugh now for the second most hundreds scored in England by an Australian player, and there's one player that he needs 5 more to beat. And I'm sure most of our listeners could guess that is Sir Don himself. But I think that recognises how good he's been. If there's one knock on some of the great batters of Australian eras gone past, is that they haven't always batted amazingly overseas. And I mean, guys like Ponting batted more than well enough in England, but certainly didn't excel, I think, quite at the level that Smith has overseas. So I think he's a superstar. I really hope that this isn't his last Ashes, to be honest with you, because I even think at 38 years old, he'll roll out of bed and peel off a couple of hundreds next time we go over there. If he's available to play, I have nothing but immense respect. And now that his hand-eye has just slowed down a little bit, the fact that he's still able to peel off these hundreds says everything you need to know about the character of the man. It's going to be a sad day when we can't rely on him to come in at number 4 and average 60. From an Australian perspective, I think it was good to see Warner obviously get some runs. I think that the way he's going to go about it is not going to mean he's going to average 60, but we really only just need Warner to put some pressure on the opposition, average a counter-attacking, 35 to 40, and I think we'll be happy with that, particularly with the way Khawaja's batting. I think it was good, the balance between him. Warner runs in the first innings, Khawaja run in the second innings, and Khawaja's being so patient now with how he's playing his cricket. Other than that, I mean, I would like to see Travis take on the short ball in the second innings. I think that if he's a sitting duck, it's a matter of time, but I think he'll embrace that more going forward. The bowlers was what I really struggled with, to be honest with you. So there'll have to be a Scott Boland conversation, no doubt, for the next test match. Pat Cummins, A, because he's an elite cricketer, and B, because he's our captain, is obviously the first name on the team sheet. I think it's more than likely than not, unless it's a raging green seamer, that they'll go to Murphy. Is that I don't particularly know how to assess the performance of Hazelwood and Stark. Stark obviously bowled a couple of unplayable deliveries. He also bowled some just tripe at different points, to be honest, and that is the Mitchell Stark experience. He will bowl some spells that are unplayable. He will bowl some absolute garbage. Hazelwood was steady, but nothing impressive, and I guess that's the one question I leave this Test match with is, do we shake up the bowling attack or do we stick as we are?
Headingley's an interesting one because it's more about what's going on up in the sky rather than the deck itself. Generally, the deck itself is quite flat, but yeah, I'd be really tempted to play Scott Boland, and it would probably depend on how Hazelwood is pulling up because he's played the first 2 games of this series, and it's the next test begins on Thursday, so it's a very quick turnaround. So I think there will be a Scott Boland conversation. I'd be really tempted to find some way to bring him in, and I think he would bowl really well at Headingley, particularly if there is some grey skies and the lights do come on. But then again, you look at the question of, do you flirt with a winning formula? And Stark, he did bowl some pretty trash deliveries, but at the same time, like that ball that he bowled to Ollie Pope was unbelievable. And obviously, he can get you a few runs at number 8 as well. So, if Boland does play in place of someone like Stark, Australia's tail is a little bit longer. And Australia were able to get away with it at Edgbaston. But, it's still a little bit of a wait and see. How big is the impact of Nathan Lyon? There was a stat, since he debuted in 2011, August of 2011, there's been 126 test matches for Australia. He's played 122. He missed 2 in England in 2013 in place of Ashton Agar. He got dropped for a test in India in 2013 as well in place of Xavier Doherty. That's a throwback. And then he got left out for a game where Australia decided to play 4 seamers at the Wacker on a green top, a real green top. So, it's pretty long. It's great longevity for Nathan Lyon, but I must admit, I'm kind of really excited to see what the future of Australian spin looks like with Todd Murphy and, just having a go in Western conditions as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm a big fan of the continued development of Mitchell Schwepson, but I think that it's good that we have a finger spinner for this situation. I think that if Schwepson was the other spinner in the squad and we proceeded to pick him, he could have bowled very well, but I guarantee you bullet point number 1 on the batting card in the England team meeting would have been go after him, try hit him out of the attack. And they'll do the same to Murphy. But I think if Murphy, there's a couple of things. One, Murphy he's obviously not, he's a finger spinner, so he doesn't necessarily turn him square, but he does get really good shape on the ball. And I also think the thing that impressed me the most in India was his ability to recognise the pace he needed to bowl on any given wicket. In fact, there are 1 or 2 test matches in India where Murphy figured out the pace of the wicket quicker than Nathan Lyon did. And that's always probably been the one knock on Lyon in his career, is assessing the subcontinental conditions. I think that, put it this way, I'm a lot more comfortable with it now that we're 2-0 up. I think that Todd Murphy's a good cricketer. I think he's going to be a good bowler for us going forward. My only concern is whether he's ready to be a fully fledged wicket taker. But in these conditions, I think we just need him to, be able to bowl some overs, hold up an end, pick up a few wickets here or there, be another option at the tail. And I think he'll succeed. But don't be shocked if England go after him. And in a way, that might give him an opportunity to get a couple of wickets. But I am a lot more confident in him than I've been in pretty much every second spinner we've taken to England since McGill was on the 05 tour, to be honest with you. So I think I think he's going to thrive, assuming that they don't bash him over a 35-metre boundary for the first couple of overs he bowls.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I would like to see Swepson get an opportunity in Western conditions at some point. He has a really good record in Australia with the extra bounce that he can get as a leg spinner. But yeah, he's played on some pretty tough wickets in Pakistan and Sri Lanka as well. So, I was pretty critical of him after those tours, but in hindsight, I was probably a bit harsh on Swepson. But I think Murphy's the right call in this situation. He clearly came out of that Indian tour as the second best spinner. And, I think the fact that he's been able to, take wickets against a quality batting lineup that consists of Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, Shubman Gill, Pujara, those are pretty solid names. And to take a 7 for on debut means that, you you got a bit about you, and pretty trying conditions as well in Nagpur. But let's throw it back to the first test. We're doing this a little bit out of order. The test at Lords just ended in such a controversial manner that we had to talk about it first up. But really entertaining game of test cricket. Let's go with that. All results possible on day 5, which is what you want from a test match, and probably a little bit critical of the pitch then there as well. Just like, I know it produced an exciting result, but just not much in it for anyone. I know Lyon took 4 in that first game. Well, took 4 in each innings, so 8 overall, and Cummins took 4 in that second innings to really rein England back in. But what were your thoughts on the first test, and will England be haunted by Stokes' declaration on day 1?
A couple of things, actually, before we cap off Nathan Lyon's section of this podcast. You could make a strong case that his second innings contributions with the bat in both test matches were significantly more important than perhaps in retrospect he'll get credit for. I think that England's recipe with the way they want to go about it with Bazball, which is a phrase I think we're all almost a little bit sick of hearing now, but is that flat wickets but attacking cricket. And I think that's how we're ending up with these results, on wickets that I think very easily could have been draws had they been playing in a more traditional English style of cricket, which I'm fine with in the sense that, look, the most important thing for me in most cases is we get a result, but it's not a result within 2.5 days. So on the whole, this is balancing out on the equilibrium. I think that England have asked for relatively flat wickets, and don't feed me the ICC corporate line, the home team doesn't get a say on the pitch. But I suspect that the pitches have been compensated for with England's style of play. The declaration I felt was a little bit naive, and in hindsight, a little bit silly in the sense that they didn't take a wicket. Again, Usman Khawaja, credit to the way he batted, he really kept us in that game where we could have been in a little bit of trouble, particularly when Smith, I think, got out and we were 3 for not all that many. I think we were 3 for 67. Travis and Uzi obviously batted really well. Generally, thoughts on the test match. I mean, from my perspective, I probably enjoyed that test match more in the sense that I think that the wicket had some more life in it, at least for the spinners as well. Obviously, we saw Moeen Ali, rip the ball a little bit in the second dig. Nathan Lyon, certainly, with his 4 as well, was able to turn the ball. But I do think the pitches have been below par. I think it was in the first test, but I do think that's by design. So I'm reticent to criticise the ground staff too much on that. But it was a great first test, and I hope that once the series is over, that we all still are talking about, what a captain's knock that was from Pat Cummins in the 4th innings to get the boys home. A guy that probably hasn't batted as well as I would have liked since taking over the captaincy, but we all know he's got it in him, and I think that's spurred a lot of belief in Australia.
Absolutely, and I echo most of your thoughts about that. And let's talk about the third test. So Headingley is generally a ground that we play quite well. I remember 2009, England won the toss, elected to bat. We bowled him out for 100. Peter Siddle took 5 for 21. Stuart Clark took 3 wickets. Andrew Strauss should have been out first bowl of the game to a typical Billy Bowden decision. And Australia went on to win that game to square the series 1-1. Got close at Headingley. Josh Hazlewood took 9 wickets last time Australia played there. So that might be in the selectors' minds if they're choosing between, Mitchell Starc and Scott Boland and himself in this scenario. But a lot I think will depend on the wicket. I'm not going to lie, I would love this to be a green seamer and both teams decide to go and play 4 quicks. I'd love to see Michael Neser play in those conditions. And I think he could offer something really handy with the bat. I don't think he'll get a look in this series as much as I'd like him to. But it will all depend. And what do you think England might do with their selection? And do you think it will be pitch dependent?
Firstly, worth calling out, there is rain in the area Saturday through Monday next week. I know that forecasts are a fair way up, but I suspect that, so this week through next week, I suspect that England are going to have to shake things up on the wicket, and they're going to have to ask for something that's going to seem a little bit. And I know that, like you said, that's not really how it works there. It's more about overhead conditions. I also think that if you're not going to make it a green seamer, it's time to put Jimmy Anderson on ice for a little bit. That and the 43 body blows he copped in the 25 minutes that no one needed to watch at 1 a.m. last night. So I think that England are going to have to be forced into a green seamer. And I think for Australia, it's got to be just don't concede too much ground in the first innings. You're right. I think England will come out buoyed by that Stokes knock. But I think if Australia can break even or hold England off for the first couple of days of this test match, the thoughts of going down 3-0 in a home Ashes series will start to creep in for the English. So I think the first innings for Australia is going to have with the bat is going to be very crucial to the rest of the test series as far as from a mentality perspective. You're right. I don't think Neeser gets a look in, and that's not out of lack of ability. But I do think that England have to go for a green seamer. I think it'd be a bizarre choice to prepare another flat wicket.
And we have seen England perform well with their bats ball mentality. And, I remember Zach Crawley and Ben Duckett, both scoring 80s on a green top in New Zealand in a day-night test. And pretty sure Harry Brook ended up getting 100 in that game as well. So I just feel like they need something to bring their bowlers into it. And if it's a flat wicket again, I think I would support that. You can only play one of Ollie Robinson and James Anderson. I don't feel like you can play both. It depends which one you want to go with. I think Broad has to keep playing. Not that he's had the wood over David Warner this series. He's only got him out once, but I just think his momentum in the series, he took 4 wickets in the first innings, I'm pretty sure. I would play Tung again, or Tung, however you pronounce it. I thought he actually showed a bit of spirit, bit of ticker. He got Pfeiffer against Ireland on test debut, and I thought he was actually quite impressive. So whether Mark Wood is available to play, if it's a flat deck, I think Mark Wood would have to play. But if it's a green seamer, yet again, I would be very hesitant. You've got Chris Wokes waiting in the wings, and he's got a better average than both Broad and Anderson in English conditions. And if he got the new ball, it could be quite. He's got a good record against David Warner in particularly one-day cricket as well. So
England desperately needs some more batting if Moeen Ali's not going to be available.
Yeah, and if Moeen Ali's not available, you could get Chris Wokes to bat 8. The Knights Hawk in Stuart Broad could bat at 9. So a few options for England. They've announced their 15-man squad. There hasn't been any changes, and Moeen Ali has still kept the sole spinner. So it depends whether his finger injuries have properly healed up. So, Lewis, before we finish up, prediction time. Do England win at Headingley, or do Australia win the series? Or is it a draw due to potential weather?
It's so hard to pick a draw with the way England want to play their cricket. And knowing they also know that if they draw a test match now, the best they can do is draw the series, which means we retain the Ashes, which is obviously not what they want. I think realistically, I think that the most likely outcome is England come out and win this one. And I mean, obviously there's a caveat. If it pisses down for 3 days, it's going to be a draw. That England can't rescue a result out of nothing. And Australia, whilst we don't play boring cricket, if there's a draw to be taken, I don't think we're going to be silly about the way we go about it. I think the most likely outcome is that England come out and bounce back. It's very hard for me to say that, given my clear and extreme bias. But I do think that England are probably light favourites coming into this one. A bit of that depending on obviously health and a few other things for some of the guys involved. But I do think there's some guys in that middle order that are going to be desperate to prove they're capable of a little bit more than what they've showed so far.
And very quickly, what's your bowling attack if you're England? Who's your 8 through to 11?
If I'm assuming everyone's healthy and I'm assuming the wicket's got a little bit in it, but it's nothing, it's not the colour of AstroTurf, I'm probably going, I think Anderson just needs a rest. I'm probably going Broad, Tung, Wokes and Ali and really bolstering that, bottom order. Plus you obviously got Ben Stokes. Again, assuming he's healthy, he was really proppy for a guy that made a flawless 150 just about. It sounds like a weird thing to say. But yeah, I suspect that that's probably the attack I'd go with. If it's a raging green seamer, then of course you'd leave Molinari out and probably bring, I guess Anderson's probably the one that takes that spot if it's a real raging green seamer.
Yeah, if it's a green top, I think he's got to play, but I'll stand by my opinion. I would be of the opinion that you could play only one of Robinson or Anderson. And if Mark Wood is available, I would just personally get him in there. But his fitness has been he's been under an injury cloud for the first couple of games. But Lewis, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining me, mate. It's always a pleasure to talk cricket with you, and I'm sure we'll be texting throughout the test match as we were last night.
No, look, thanks for having me on, mate. If I've got a piece of advice to Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes, it's don't throw stones in glass houses, lads. YouTube is a depth of videos proving you guys are on the wrong side of history. So not that I couldn't be a bit contradictory in my own nature, but stay in your lane, win games of cricket, let the bat and the ball do the talking. Because at the moment it's a pretty resounding 2-0.
You heard it from the man himself. That's a great closing quip from Louis. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you follow our social media pages, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Okay, and we've got some really exciting episodes coming up. We're about to head back into the studios at Pod Booth and film some really exciting episodes with some awesome guests. So take care, everyone. Cheers.